camera?
You're in the,
Do you want me to be on camera?
yeah, yes.
Oh, okay,
You should, I think you should stay on camera.
okay.
You're only showing on a small view anyway, because you have your screen share up. So that's the big portion, and then you're
Okay,
side as the speaker.
okay.
What? I'm starting it in a minute.
And then you're gonna be okay.
In a little bit, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna start letting people in, David, but I'm not gonna start speaking for a minute or two.
Okay. I wish there was a better microphone set.
You're not needed.
What?
You're not needed.
Oh, I wish there was a better
You might be-
microphone set up.
Okay, well, it looks like it's 7:01, so let's begin the program. I am still letting people in, but I did want to mention, anybody that has any questions during this presentation, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we'll address them at the end of the program. And if something happens where you get booted out, or if your computer crashes, just click on the link again and I'll let you back in. And I'm still admitting people, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter. His name is David. And David, you can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Donna. My full name is David L. Miles, Charlevoix, Michigan. And thanks to Northern Michigan College's Christy Lyons and Donna Cannon for the invitation to the Charlevoix Historical Society to participate in a lifelong learning program, series of lectures and presentations. And welcome everyone to this program on how the Society came to produce the first book ever written on Charlevoix's renowned builder in stone, Earl Young, now known around the world. And why now? Why has there never before been one done on a man whose works have become one of the top actions in northern Michigan? The Historical Society had done a 2-hour DVD on Young's life and works in 2009, then a succinct 32-page guidebook to his works in 2015, which has since sold in the neighborhood of 4,000 copies. Photographer Mike Barton of Solana Beach, California, and a summer visitor to Charlevoix had produced his own full-color photo book, now in its third updated print, currently one of his best-selling works. His name might be familiar to those of you who have seen his beautiful Harbor Springs, Petoskey Bay View book. The Society co-produced a 48-minute documentary on Earl, the Wizard of Boat Park, that had its world premiere in Charlevoix in 2015, was shown on Michigan Public TV in 2016, and for which we received a Best Historical Documentary, Michigan in 2017. Come to our museum to see the statuette on display. But why never a fully researched biography? The answer is that until within the decade before I started writing in 2019, we had yet to possess all the knowledge or material we would have needed to do Earl Young full justice he deserved. A PowerPoint program on the man and his books that I gave at the Charlevoix Public Library in 2009 opened the floodgates. His daughter Marguerite, just turned 90, came up from Traverse City to see it. Afterward, she said she possessed several photos from her father's collection. Would I like to see them? She returned a few weeks later carrying 2 small boxes filled with both photos and negatives. There might or might not be anything of interest, she said, and left them on loan. I began scanning, and in minutes, felt like a Spanish conquistador who had stumbled upon El Dorado. It was a gold mine extraordinaire. 5 years later, Earl's granddaughter cleaned out her mother's house here in Charlevoix and brought us 2 carloads of documents, artifacts, and even more photos. Another gold mine. Other miscellaneous items also arrived. The crux came in October of 2018 when I arrived for the monthly Board of Directors meeting, and our president, Denise Fate, said, I've been talking to the Charlevoix Circle of Arts, the library, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and we all feel it's time to give consideration to a biography of Earl Young because there is so much inquiry all over town about him these days. What do you think? I had done several books for the society. At this, I wasn't going in blind, and so of course said, let's give it a shot. The board approved financing for the project at the end of the year, and I rounded up the editorial team to get started in January. A few of the names might be familiar to some of you. The crew consisted of my lifetime editors, Mary Ann Chu and Kay Heisey, plus Jennifer Harsha Carroll, whose great aunt, Irene Harsha, married Earl Young to bring along a family vibe and also her own ex-freelance editor. Relatively new hire at the museum, Trevor Dotson, also agreed to lend a hand as principal researcher. We were augmented later by Marcia Brown, who helps with our step-on bus tours of the Earl Young houses in Charlevoix in general, with final editing performed by the totally impartial and expert editor-author Jan Grupp, who really tightened the text up. The main group met once a week through June, energized lots of dark chocolate, took the summer off, then we resumed at Labor Day through the end of October. We did the book chapter by chapter with myself writing a first draft of each. Then we would select from a large roster of candidates the best, most referential photos to accompany the text. I had a leg up on content because of those programs I had been presenting on Earl for a decade. So quite a few bit of the text were nothing more than copy and paste from the script. The agony of putting this book together, like almost all we've done, was not what photos we had to search for, but how many we had to leave out. In a couple of instances, the possession of a photo for inclusion was a case of pure serendipity, as if the fates were at work to bring the images we needed to us. For example, the Historical Society already had photos of Earl's parents, Adolph and Murray. We had always thought that Earl was an only child. Not so. Murray's 1914 obituary, read now for the first time, mentioned a son named Harry. Who was he? Then a stroke of luck. A photograph taken at Earl's birth town of Barcelona, 30 miles south of Charlevoix, before the family moved in 1900 with a then grown Harry, was to us on Facebook. That's Earl on the left. Harry is on the right. His half-brother from Murray's until now unknown of first marriage, which left her a widow with a 5-year-old. But who's the baby? Trevor went to work and discovered there were actually 2 more brothers after Earl, one survived nameless for only 2 days, and another, odd seen here, who lived to 3 years and 4 months. We contacted the person who put the photo and she gave us permission for usage. You'll notice how much Earl resembled his rather formidable mother. Earl and his parents moved to Charlevoix when he was 11. Adolf opened an insurance office, the small building on the right, next to the Majestic Movie and Vaudeville Theater, which he would come to own and, on a personal note, lease to my grandfather for 6 years, beginning in 1913. Young Earl, in the meantime, immediately began to discover the area's boulders, which would become the motif of his future life. We knew that the parents divorced, but not when, until Trevor tapped away and had a date in a few minutes, 1905. All hail the internet. Around that time, a teenage Earl became an accomplished amateur photographer, which stood him in good stead in the early days of his building career. A lot of his photographic work has survived. I have to show you two of my favorites. The permanent record of how Charlevoix has always been a foodie destination, once offering in the left window electrocuted hot dogs on Bridge Street. And this one, which took my breath away, negative turned positive on my computer, an incomparable capture of the essence of Charlevoix. Those masts are just over 100 feet tall. One of the donated treasures was a large photo album bound walrus hide, containing a record of Earl's 6-week trip of lifetime to the Caribbean in 1913 with his best friend, Don Campbell, highlighted by viewing advanced construction of the Panama. We knew they had done this, but had no knowledge it had been preserved, such the epic earth moving required to install the waterway. Notice in the handful coming up that visitors could go practically anywhere on the canal with no supervision or hard hats. Try that today at any construction site. Pretty good work for an amateur. Also arriving for us was a group photo of Murdy at center and his fiancée Irene Harsha at far right. The group's location is outside Charlevoix train station. Murdy would not live to see her son and Irene marry. She died on Valentine's Day, 1914. We also received the 1915 honeymoon trip that took the two downstate here in Ann Arbor on an apparently cold September day. Of their first home, Earl's house across the street from the Harsha family residence, was discovered in a donation received in 2007 of the entire Charlevoix Courier photo morgue that spans half a century. We were able to assemble photos of their first offspring, but oddly enough, not one of the third generation possessed a childhood photo of their mother or Aunt Virginia, the fourth and final child born in 1926. That's Marguerite at right. As famous Earl would eventually become, it was not until he was 30 years old that his first creation began to appear. A University of Michigan School of Architecture dropout after only 1 year, 1908-1909, because he didn't agree with anything he was being taught there, never becoming a registered architect, possessed of his own ideas and almost totally self-taught, full determination but with no opportunity to put his desires to work. It was only a quirk of fate that allowed his career to finally take off. That is described in the Boulders book, much too late to go into here. Once he got started, Earl Young never let up for the next 54 years, and in the doing really put Charlevoix on the map. Now, with that introduction, what I'm going to do now is trace the path of Earl's artistic development from 1921 to 1973. Doing this book, advantage of being able to include Mike Barton's masterful digital photography really allowed us to discover the arc of Earl Young's artistic and creative life. I cannot show and narrate to you all of the almost 400 images in Boulders, plus the numerous stories. But what I can briefly do is set you on the path of your own discovery of what a form of genius is to accomplish. For example, take a look at this floor plan. It is only one of two that we know of that Earl used.
No, but he played.
For practically all of his entire career, he designed and built out of his head, often on the inspiration of the moment. Perhaps unsure of how to get started, Earl had this drawn for him by Petoskey architect Charles Hanson, and from 1919 to 1921, he constructed his first house at 304 Park Avenue, overlooking Lake Michigan, called a split boulder bungalow. Earl altered the design by extending the back full width 3 stories to include a basement at the bottom, and built the first of his many magnificent fireplaces. During the house construction, he also built his first real estate office downtown, with, of course, a boulder out front. 4 more years would elapse with no opportunity to put his desires to work until fate intervened, again, too long a tale to describe here, but by 1924, he had obtained an undeveloped intended resort community site of 85 lots on 3 dozen acres west of town along the Michigan shore called Boulder Park, and he was on his way. Here it must be said that for over a decade, our chronology of Earl's structures was based upon research done for a 2005 Eastern Michigan University master's thesis by Kelly Simpson. Kelly did a superb job, but at the turn of the century, the much needed Charlotte newspaper research sources had yet to be placed online. We discovered just a few dating errors through our own recent research, and it readjusted the timeline until we were pretty well to establish the chronology of the first 5 Boulder Park houses, since very scant records were kept at that time, which were his, which we know were not, and which might have been. In one instance, it was the chance discovery of a tiny photo of a newly completed house included in Earl's 1927 Boulder Park advertising for the summer crowd at Wright. We had thought up to this point that it had been constructed 3 years later. The definitely first one became called the Red Mortar House for obvious reasons, finished in 1925. Here it must be emphasized, no Earl Young house is like any other Earl Young house. Each has its own idiosyncratic design and personal touch. Here you can see this one's, the 4 stones installed in the gable stucco on both the front and west elevations. The Mortar House 1926 with its asymmetrical facade, now using stones delicately outlined in white as compared to the previous house's rough treatment at left, and its uniquely placed upper side windows. This was the house discovered in the 1927 ad. The 1926-1927 Panama House, once owned by Hollywood producer, writer, and director Norman Panama, here unfinished, and here showing the unique walls of local cobblestone. The fireplace is a magnificent, uninterrupted plane from floor to ceiling. At the same time, a block away, the Eastern Road House, for the first time, fully clad in large stones all over, as it looked originally, an open porch, and as it looks today after much remodeling. This point is where I discovered that Earl made a stylistic about face. Hello, I've lost pictures.
David, we can hear you. With the presentation dropped off. I think if maybe Trevor could come over and get it back up, share your screen again.
Yeah, he's here now. Okay, we're back where we ended. I don't know what happened there. This point is where I discovered that Earl made a stylistic about face. Every one of these houses have front doors that face the road. His next house will change that, perhaps influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright's prairie house style designs that hid or disguised entry doors, although the hair on the back of Earl's neck stood up at any comparison to Wright. He asserted he was influenced only by Mother Nature, no one else. The Green Mortar House has a partly hidden doorway that you don't see in full until you're standing directly in front of it within the arbor porch. That's the original garage at Rush, now a shed. Cars were very short back then. Next came his breakthrough, what he'd always wanted to do, construct a house almost entirely of boulders that had been ejected from melt glaciers at the end of the last ice age, almost 12 millennia ago, called glacial erratics. Begun in 1928, Boulder Manor slowly went up over the winter using stones Earl had been collecting for years from all over the tip of the Mitt and into the Upper Peninsula. This is one of my favorite photos in the book. From 1929, it shows the scale of the rocks in relation to the humans that would live with them after the house was finished. Inside, a symphony of stone and wood. To the right of the view, one of the most powerful fireplaces he ever created. The story how Earl lost the unfinished house of the bank for almost 8 Great Depression years in the midst of construction is detailed in the book. Just prior to losing Boulder Manor, Earl managed to finish another at the same time, next door to the Green Mortar House, here showing the previous and left and current paint schemes. Again, see how the entry is hidden. And again in 1929, finished in 1930, what has been dubbed the Pagoda House, with a Gothic window capped by a slightly off-center keystone, another of its individual touches. This is the first house built with tiered Onaway stone, quarried about 36 miles east of Petoskey. Tiered layering would become one of Earl's trademark design motifs. In 1931 came the last of his originals at the park, the aptly named Owl House. From its unique double-arched windows, like the eyes of a wise old bird. What had always impressed me about his stonework here is how light it all appears, and I could never figure out how he achieved the effect. Then I found it when I compared the image to that of the Eastern Road House at left. Can you see it? The lightness of touch? In the Owl House, not one stone touches any other stone, even if it's only a fraction of an inch away, like they're floating. The last house Earl built in Boulder Park in 1933 was what became known as the Enchanted Cottage. It was built at the request of a couple named Cross from Illinois, who had seen the plan in the Ladies' Home Journal magazine, and we think Earl agreed to do what he did not design because it was the depths of the Depression and he probably needed the money. This is how it looked when finished. It was at this point that we determined to give the credit that was long overdue to Earl's wife Irene for her role in helping her husband in his projects. Irene was an art teacher, prolific artist in almost all media in her own right. It's evidenced in these 3 maps that she produced along with Earl in 1934, 1936, and 1935 of the Little Traverse Bay region, the Grand Traverse region, and Mackinac Island, respectively. They appear in hundreds of offices and homes still today, and at one time were available through the J.L. Hudson department store in Detroit and Marshall Fields in Chicago. Irene was the silent partner who listened and watched as Earl sketched and talked about his construction plans for a following day. She would then translate this information to workable form and slip it to the construction crew on the sly so they'd have some idea what he would be talking about after he arrived on site. This of Abide was found in a big artifact donation along with another of Abide, the only 2 sketches we know of that have survived. Once he was finished in Boulder Park, Earl turned his attention back to the land he had acquired in 1937 within the same block where his home was located on Park Avenue. Time for phase 2 of his career. A totally different dual-crest topography now challenged him, unlike the relatively flat parcels at Boulder Park. In 1938, at the point of the intersection of Park Avenue and Clinton Street, abide, protected with pine trees he refused to cut down, where Earl's imagination loosens up and subtly flowing moving lines now begin to appear. Earl joked that he often did his roof lines first, then shoved the houses in underneath them. One thing the family donation revealed that we never knew was that Earl had installed an extensive rock and pool garden along the bluff over Clinton Street, and that he hired a professional photographer to create an album of Abide interior shots for sales promotion for what was intended to be used as a rental property. His fireplaces continued on their idiosyncratic path. Because the advent of World War II kibosh on building materials, the next house was kept back by 5 years. Coldly tied next door to Abide, it was cantilevered out over a basement and down to Clinton Street like his own house had been. Much of the rock pool had to be demolished to accommodate this house. Again, see how the front door at left is situated perpendicular to the street. Apparently, Earl was able to scrape together enough material to build with and possibly incorporate some of the torn up rock pool for use in his exterior walls. Right after war's end in late 1945, this house was built across the street, originally with its stone painted white and topped by thatch, neither of which would last many years longer. After over a year of work, 1947 saw the completion of Earl's artistic masterpiece, his second personal home that was finally a statement of artistic philosophy, the creation of a structure related solely to the altered ground on which it sits, building and land together creating a harmonious integrated whole into a complete work of art. Notice how the roof line, the shingles, eaves, and stones all echo the gentle undulations of the ground below them. This house could be situated on no other piece of land in Charlevoix other than the one which inspired it. All of the stonework integrates the ground below it to the exterior walls. Inside on the place, Earl began an experimentation with the diagonal line and how it looks today. Notice the interwoven ceiling. I still can't figure out how he did it. Completed also that year the height of his whimsicality, the so-called half house. Now we know why Earl's creations are called mushroom houses, Tolkien houses, hobbit houses, gnome homes, and early Mother Goose. The diagonal again is put to work for the whole airstone capstone of the fireplace. While outside on the east wall, Earl made his stones act like escaping balloons. Unfortunately, this ale cannot be seen from the street. It would seem like his creative life might have climaxed here. Can you top this? But Earl Young, now a steam master, was only getting started. There was much more to come. 1954 appeared his second large residential masterpiece, the official mushroom house Earl said it was. He declared, in the form of a button mushroom. Here as it originally looked, here as it looks today, the most photographed residence so far in the history of Charlevoix, in which he achieved pinnacle of his creation of the diagonal. At the same time, if existing records can be believed, Earl finished the so-called Park Avenue block with a structure I greatly appreciate for he allowed his mind to do, visually hook a house into its surroundings. He did this by taking the tiered limestone wall under the huge overhanging eave around the corner, around the garage door, around accessed entry to the upstairs apartment, around the stairs to the upper terrace, then all the way up to the Park Avenue corner with a brake to fasten at Park Avenue corner. Inside are the most concise fireplaces ever did, now expressing the vertical. Here came a decision point for the book, because during this decade and a half, Earl built one house out of sequence location-wise, and that house commissioned in 1948 by William Sutter, head of the Speedway 79 gas stations in Michigan, for newly purchased property bordering Lake Michigan near present hospital. It was Earl's third and largest residential masterpiece, built on the theme of three. After completing half house, he found Park Avenue to do this one between 1949 and 1950. So I determined that the Sutter and another house across the street from it, also maybe from 1954, needed their own chapter, not by date, but by location to avoid confusion. Here is the lakeside patio view of the Sutter. A brief summary. The Sutters were friends with renowned character actress Agnes Moorehead, best known in her later life as Endra on the TV series Bewitched. She appeared in such classics as Citizen Kane and Hush Hush Sweet. Agnes would come to Charlevoix incognito and spend hours and days with the Sutter playing canasta on the radio. Back to the house. Notice the visual theme of three, explained in the book, tripartite, slightly wobbly chimney. Again, the emphasis on the fireplace diagonal lines that adhere throughout the living room and beyond as they originally appeared and as they do today. Believe me, you have to stand in front of this masterwork to experience its hypnotizing effect. The house mentioned across the street was constructed using red sandstone dug up during the renovation of one of the canals at Sault Ste. Marie, 100 miles north of Charlevoix. As it looked after being built at top left, and as it ended up after several remodelings in 2015 at bottom, fireplace reverted to the full-face style seen in Abide. While Earl was finishing up these last middle period houses, if our sources can again be believed, at the same time, from 1953 to 1954, he was also building his piece, the Weather Vane Inn, which I'm sure needs no introduction to most of you. The entire story of its genesis is very extensive, beginning with Earl's late 1930s desire to build an entire resort complex on the site of the depression-threatened Charlevoix Lumber Company, of the Edgewater Inn area. This was stymied by the outbreak of World War II. Earl instead focused on the 1885 grist mill across US 31, at least for a restaurant. Obtained the mill after 10 years of negotiation in 1953 and set to work tearing it down immediately. Over winter, the restaurant complex began to take form and the vein was ready to launch in July of 1954, when it became the sensation of the North. Look closely. The outline of the crested rooftop was deliberately designed by Earl to resemble the outstretched wings of a seagull in flight. The story of the build creation is one of the best in the book, if I do say so myself, including the enormous but at the same time humorous problems encountered in getting the 9-ton fireplace capstone to cooperate while being installed. But did you know that the weather vane was only 17 years old when it threatened to slide into the channel? In the meantime, after opening, for the next 13 years, Earl put residential construction on hiatus while he concentrated on managing the weather vane and his real estate business. During this time, he became involved in commercial projects, the construction of 2 of our upper-tier motels. First, the Lodge, begun in 1958, that's Earl in the white shirt. Opened in 1959, truly one of the most up-to-date motels in Michigan. Opened in 1959, Truly one of the most up-to-date, whoops, sorry about that. And the site of Charlevoix's first indoor heated swimming pool. Now, of course, those of you who have driven through Charlevoix for the last few years well know it has been transformed into a high-end boutique destination below Earl. Years later, Earl went to work on the vacated site of Charlevoix and Michigan's first hotel, the Fountain City House that opened in 1867. He constructed the weather vane terrace, still going strong. Noted for its incredible lobby fireplace that Earl described as a symbolic interpretation of Charlevoix's piers, Round Lake, and outlying islands. If you've never seen this work, I highly advise stopping in, plus the fireplace in the breakfast room behind it. Here, Earl's claim that he had never been influenced by anyone or anything other than Mother Nature could be questioned by taking a look at what he had definitely seen at Loeb Farms, today's Castle Farm South Home, where the motif of circular stairwell silos crowned by witches' hats. His towers in both motels bear an uncanny resemblance, both Loeb Farms' glory days and its sorry, decrepit days. The most challenging chapter was trying to capture Charlevoix almost lost the Wayne restaurant in 1971, when the building support along the channel began to give way. I had to start almost a century before 1971 to explain the full complex story of what happened regarding federal revetment responsibility regarding the grist mill, an argument that in 1938 actually ended up in the United States. The government responsible for the entire channel since 1876 did have a case for not providing a revetment, as explained in the book, but its decision almost resulted in disaster. We were able to piece the story together from our own document files and Trevor's research, climax on how a single historic photograph from the 1890s provided by author Charlevoix photographer Bob Miles saved the day after what was a hair-raising close call. Yes, you are seeing it. The revet had totally disappeared during a 3-day rainforest gale in November of 1970. That is crushed stone barged in December to try to replace what had been washed out up to the weather vanes in places exposed foundations. Charlevoix and Earl Young came within an inch of devastation. Prior to this trauma, Earl had resumed residential rebuilding, this time Bull Lodge Motel on ground to the east of the Charlevoix Lumber Company. He installed a road called Thistledown Lanes as access, and immediately next to the east end of the future Edgewater site, went up an experiment with a popular design Times, an A-frame, 1967. Inside, one of those flamboyant fireplace treatments he ever did, fronted by a staircase into the viewing belt made of pieces hewn from the trunk of a double-hearted elm tree. This is how the house looks today. The next house next door, 969, would not have made it into the book had it not been for the recent donation of a huge collection of photos of every house in Charlevoix taken by the county treasurer's office in the 1980s. To our bafflement, neither the Historical Society or Earl Young Estate possessed one of this house except for a single, fuzzy, unusable image in a realtor's advertising leaflet. So at least we were able to include the 3 black and whites of Earl's second house using brilliant red sandstone around an exterior form that contained not one 90-degree corner. Its basic floor plan is 2 tangential circles, one large, one small, nothing else. The structure was bulldozed in 1984 in one afternoon to make way for the house currently on the site, one so dark and hidden by trees you don't even notice it's there. Earl's last creation begun in 1970 and going up as the weather vane was threatened to come down, became called the Castle House from the crenellations of its 3 towers. It took 3 years to complete. Later, again in 1994, not a good year for Earl Young's last houses, was swallowed up by a huge addition that greatly heightened and altered the largest tower but left the lakeside one intact, the only exterior reminder of what once originally was. I'm going to end this look at Earl's creative development career with one final image, one that amazes and inspires me every time I look at the upcoming photo, doubly so when I see its subject on site. Toward the end of his life, Earl's sight began to diminish rapidly. By the time he died in 1975, for his final few years, he was legally blind and could no longer drive. Imagine the frustration. Here is how I described it in the book. Quote, he had difficulty seeing the details of his own sketches. During the Castle House construction, it was reported that his vision was so bad, he required construction updates be described to him and that he ran his hands over stonework after it was laid to feel what he could not see. Unquote. You've just witnessed a goodly cross-section of what Earl could do with a fireplace. Now he was faced with the almost insuperable challenge of building his final one with a sense of sight so impaired he had to describe to his workmen what he envisioned, then use his sense of touch to track their progress. And this was what that so determined man was capable of bringing into being, the seemingly effortless last hurrah placed within the interior elevation of the outside tower. With this conclusion, trying to capture Earl Young's work and career, how to finish the book. Earl left a legacy above and beyond his own works, largely through his fourth child, Virginia, who inherited her parents' artistic abilities. Virginia, with no formal training, designed and built 4 houses, 3 in Charlevoix and 1 in Petoskey. The first in Charlevoix was at the end of Thistledown's early 1960s. Virginia had learned a lot from her father, but also his temperament, and the two often got into heated arguments because he kept telling her what to do. But she stood fast in her own vision. In certain ways, Virginia was even more whimsical than her father, such as the well treatment. Virginia's second house, a fairy tale gem overlooking Lake Michigan, and her third and final in 1988, the well-known Apple Core with its unique twisted brick stonework. September of 1989, Apple Core was filmed. Excuse me. Apple Core was filmed by the ABC Sunday Home Show out of New York. That's Virginia in the archway. On the national broadcast a week later, Apple Core was declared to be one of the 10 most interesting houses in America. Earl's influence can be found in houses all over northern Michigan and Charlevoix, not least in a completely redone East Park, where his love of dirt on away stone was consciously repeated as an homage to the master, and even inspired, or so the owner claims, the controversial Thatch House, a redo of his first house in 2015. Sentiment is split in Charlevoix were about the result. Some love it, others loathe it. Its overpowering presence above the neighboring Park Avenue houses. But either way is bringing many people to town to see it, and in the process, many of them are discovering Earl Young's work and the town itself. The recognized need to preserve his works and others has also resulted in the city of Charlevoix establishing 2 protected historic districts. First, our historic 1882 train depot, the second being 10 of the 11 Earl Young houses around the Park Avenue block. The Thatch House is not eligible to be included because it had been altered too extensively. More of the town is now being considered. So how to sum up this remarkable life and legacy of what Earl Young did to left for Charlevoix? It was no simple task, but I felt we captured him. Not the easiest man to deal with, work for, or write out, Earl challenged all to uncover the clues. Even his signature told us something, that he was a man supremely confident in himself and his vision, and possessed a definite interest in rounded form. I summed it up as best I could on the last page of the final chapter, where I juxtaposed two photos that tell together what he basically did with the stones he found, and said this: along came Earl Young, the right man in the right place at the right time, gathered up the choice ones, placed them together as only he knew how to do, and in Charlevoix, Michigan, brought the most sublime order out of nature's chaos. Finally, how did I come up with a title for the book? Its working title was The Life and Creations of Earl Young in Charlevoix, Michigan. That just sat there flat as a pancake. It needed more, much more, in just one word to hit the topic home. So I started reading and stopped at the quote from a 1937 Charlevoix Courier newspaper regarding the creation of Boulder Park. This is chapter 2, beneath this image of Boulder Manor's main entry. The last 5 sentences of the quote all end with the word boulders. I went no further. Now to design a cover. How to compress this story in a visual nutshell. We had this photo of Erding on, or rather dominating, a Boulder Park boulder. So I took it to Gail DeMeyer, former director of both the Crooked Tree Arts Center in Petoskey and the Charlevoix Circle of Arts. We discussed a few options, including looking at other photo candidates, but set on cutting this one in half, inserting the new title, and the last piece fell into place. We had our book. What more could one picture say? Final tweaking, final editing, and technical assemblage for printing Mike Barton. By the 1st of March last year, we were on our way. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you put a book together. It's easy once you get the hang of it. All you have to do is go to bed writing, dream writing, wake up writing, shower writing, eat, drink, walk, breathe, totally exit writing and laying out even holidays. Repeat for how many days you need until done. The reward is in the doing. Everything after is gravy, including the honor. Oops, oh dear. Get me back to where I were. Sorry about that, my finger slipped.
Scroll through.
Well, you get it with what we just did, sorry. Okay, I'll get over there. Here we go. Including the honor of having the Library of Michigan include you on its annual list of 20 notable Michigan-themed books. To be so honored by one's own state is just about as good as it gets. I hope you now know more than you did about Earl Young, what he left to Charlevoix, than when you logged in. Should you wish to obtain any of our publications or maps or DVDs regarding the man and his works, they are available through our museum at Harsha House in Charlevoix. Here is how to go about doing it. Simply go online to the Charlevoix Historical Society homepage, click on Shop to order there, phone us with order information, email an inquiry, or make a trip to Charlevoix and come to the museum in person. All of the information you need is on the website. The second printing of Boulders arrives any day now. There are more than enough to go around. Thank you, everyone, for being such a patient, extremely patient and attentive audience. We can now unmute, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you so much, David. And there are a couple of comments in the chat. And if anybody else has any more questions, you feel free to go ahead and put them in there. I'm going to address them. Mary Schwader, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She said, my grandfather, Tom Jensen, and my father, Tom Nielsen, were the Danish stonemasons that did many of these houses along Park Avenue. And then she also said Tom Nielsen did the Sucher House, S-U-C-H-E-R house, later building a garage in 1973, and the garage was subsequently torn down.
Correct. He did. We found that out, and then he came back about a year later to put in the fencing around the estate.
Okay, and then we just,
Anything else?
you. Nope, I don't see any more questions. I think
Could
with
I ask
that,
a
we can-
question?
Absolutely.
Okay, not related. I had sent this to, I forget the other guy working with you, last name D. Is there much, does the Historical Society have anything on Al Young, who is not related to Earl, but he built that house on Belvedere? That the
Al Young, was he a
Metlers,
dentist?
I don't know, he was, I forget what it said he was. I have to look at the obit again. But this guy's been posting, Peter, what's his name? Oh, one of the Olacs that wasn't from here has been posting pictures. It was a house owned by the Metlers, Richardsons. Oh gosh, on Belvedere, and Al Young, he said, build it, his uncle. Do you have any
That's a
information?
new one to me. We'd have to do some research on that.
Okay, I'll find your email to do it, but they've been posting it on the Charlevoix Facebook groups. And even somebody else told me to ask you or David.
Somebody else also,
We have your email.
Okay,
someone else asked for the email address for the Historical Society, but I will go ahead and include that in the email that I send out to everybody. And then we did have another question. What is the temperature humidity like inside the houses? I seem to recall that they had a reputation for being damp.
They had a reputation for being cold in the winter. My mother went to a women's club affair at the Boulder Manor in Boulder Park one winter, and she said she could not find a seat in the living room, that she was away from a draft. So a lot of that has been rectified, but when they were first built, a lot of them had problems. And they're very comfortable in the summer because of the stone, but they can be very cold in the winter because they retain the cold also. So most of the houses are not inhabited in the wintertime.
Okay, and it looks like a couple of people said they're going to be coming to Charlevoix, and now they'll have lots more to see.
They can stop by the museum and get a,
Go ahead.
they can stop by the museum and pick up a guide to the houses. We have the $5 guidebook, and also they can look at the, and possibly if they want, buy the Boulders book. I mentioned that the second printing is ready to come in anytime now. And that means that we have sold almost 600 in the last year. It's been going very, very well.
Good. Did you say that Earl handled the building of the Castle Farm?
He would have witnessed it because it was built between 1918 and it was finished in 1918. There were some additions after that. So he would easily have been here to see that.
How do I do it? Press it.
I think. Is it possible to ask a question? Ask.
How do I
Let
ask a
somebody-
question?
You go ahead and ask. We can hear you.
Go ahead
How
right now.
did he defy gravity? Was there special framing required to keep the stones from falling down as the mortar dried?
We have no idea. I think the man was actually a magician myself. Looking at some, especially the stonework around the Boulder Manor, how he got that line of stone all the way around to stand up. And
Yeah.
he just simply knew how to do it. It was an uncanny, intuitive procedure.
It certainly wasn't
And to
quick,
think the
Lou.
man was only 5 feet 3 inches tall.
Oh, my goodness.
Pardon?
I wondered about that. He didn't seem to be very tall.
I have a question.
He was,
To
Yes?
come to the museum, it's on State Street. What are the hours that it's open to buy a guidebook?
it's open from 12 to 4. Right now, Wednesday through Saturday. In June, we went up Tuesday through Saturday from 12 to 4.
Okay, thank you.
Are there
You're welcome.
I have
tours
a
you
question.
recommend?
This is Roger Tallman in Petoskey. And I have a question about his knowledge of plumbing and heating. Obviously, you know, they're built for summer homes, but they had to survive the winter. Is there any, did he have expertise, or was this something that he hired out people for?
He probably had a little bit of information where he went to the University of Michigan in 1908. But when he came back, he dove into construction and design books and basically was self-taught. So he had a lot of knowledge that he gained on his own and probably allied himself with several contractors here to do the work. And Earl was the type of man who could look over somebody's shoulder, see what they were doing, and he could then go ahead and do it himself. It was
Right.
just an amazing mentality.
Right. I know he focused a lot on his fireplaces, but having been owner of several older homes built in the 1800s, fireplaces take the heat out of a house in a hurry. So the fireplaces seem like they're more architecturally pleasing than actually functional.
No, they're functional, but it's just that in the winter, nobody wants to stay in any. Boulder Park was built as a resort itself, so none
Right.
of the houses out there have bays. But yes, the
Well-
fireplaces are all working fireplaces. So
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Where is his home, and where's the home he built in Petoskey?
David, you went on mute. Can you mute yourself?
Well,
that,
There you go.
familiar with the Petoskey?
Yes.
If you go out if you go out US 31 north, there is where the giant, where Glenn's grocery store, I can't remember the name of it now, it's a D&W or something, but it's just
That's
before you get to M119.
well, I have a
And
question
it's
about
down
the
below
fireplaces,
below that
stove.
shopping center. So there is a road that you can take down and you can go in front of it. You can't miss it because Virginia and her daughter, Gretchen Olson, who was a lawyer in Petoskey, co-designed the house between them, inside and out. And once you get down there, you will see it. It's unlike any other there. So down below
So
that
it's
shopping
on,
center near 119.
so it's
It's
on
on-
the lake near Bayview.
It's on a private road.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Roger Tallman again. I lived in Bayview as a young man, and if you take a boat out on the waterfront right in front to the east of Bayview, you get a great look at that house. It's unbelievable. You
Okay.
cannot see it from the ground on the interior. There's a private road that goes there, but it's a real eye opener when you go by from the waterfront. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay. No, I didn't know it was only private access down there. So
David,
that's good to know.
another question. Are there walking tours you recommend to see the young homes?
Yes, I do them myself. And I can take in like anybody from 1 up to 20. And between 1 and 5 people, it's a flat $65. 6 and over is $12 per person. Children 12 and under can go in free. So you have to call at least 24 hours ahead of time to make sure that I have a free time on the following day.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't have anything else left in chat to ask you.
What's the phone number to call?
231-547-0373.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks everyone for coming tonight. And I'll get the link to the recording and a short survey sent out. Possibly tonight. It does take a little bit for the recording to process. Might be tomorrow morning, but I'll send that out to everyone who registered. And thank you so much. And thank you, David. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.